Get the whole story.
How come the role of women during the Mau Mau uprising is not discussed as much as their male counterparts? Were they in the forest with the men braving the cold and the risk of being attacked, killed either by wild animals or the British bombs? Were they at home taking care of families as their husbands fought in the forest? As we found out, women played a vital role during the fight for independence, and this is their story. I am Agutu Rosa. Until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. The loopholes that are blatant concerning the struggle for independence in Kenya are caused by the fact that there is so much information that was never made public. Women, for instance, played a very significant role. There are those who took up arms and joined the others in the forest, like Field Marshal Muthoni wa Kirema, while others smuggled food, weapons that were mostly stolen from the homes of the colonial masters, and gave vital information to the Mau Mau, the kind of information that saved a lot of lives. Most would act as though they were doing their daily chores, but would strategically place food, weapons, medicine, and clothes in places where the Mau Mau would pick.
During the clamor for independence, women were full fighters, or you may say partakers of the war, like anybody else. Women were participating. Some were soldiers, actually. Some were forest fighters. Some were food suppliers. Some were spies. Some were oath administrators. But the challenge is we have not put the contribution of women in as much as we have put for men in our publications. We have not published a lot about women contribution.
Meeting her at her home in Nyeri, Muthoni is sitting outside a garage. She leads us to another shed where her old Mercedes-Benz is parked. The vehicle is covered with canvas, a sign that it has not been in use for a while. But how did she earn the rank Field Marshal?
It is a rank given just like the generals and the major. You are given the ranks by merit. You start from the bottom and you earn the ranks.
Before going to the forest, Muthoni, who was a newlywed married to General Mutungi, used to give intel to Kimathi while disguised as a shepherd.
Before I went to the forest, I used to be Kimathi's informer. When the colonialists found out, I knew I'll be captured, so I went to the forest and joined other freedom fighters. When Kimathi was in the forest, I was his spy, so I disguised myself as a herder. I would take goats, cows, and chicken to the forest. When I found out that the colonialists knew about me, I left the cows, goats, and chicken and ran.
The Mau Mau were in the forest for 11 years, from 1952 to 1963. But Muthoni feels as though they spent 22 years in the forest.
I was in the forest from 1952 to 1963. Those are 11 years, but they felt like 22 years. I counted the days and nights separately. The nights were more scary.
One would wonder how they coexisted with the wild animals for a decade plus without regular attacks.
When you join the forest, there's a unique smell you have because you aren't clean and you have not been using soap. After a while, you start smelling like the animals because there was no soap, and the only difference between us and the animals was that we had 2 legs and the animals had 4 legs.
There came a time animals would alert them when the colonialists were in the forest. They'd run in the opposite direction, which gave them time to hide.
We had mastered the forest, so when they came looking for us, we would be hiding even on top of trees, and we would just watch them as they searched for us.
Muthoni recalls times when the nights were so cold and rainy that they would find herds of wild animals lying down. Then the animals would move to allow them to sleep on the ground where they had been to get the warmth the animals had created. Apart from support from the four-legged allies, they also got support from the people outside.
During that time, the people in the forest and the ones out were one because we were fighting the same enemy. They would gather food for us and put it at the edge of the forest. When the colonialists found out, they would cover the edges, but the people outside would alert us and they would not go where the colonialists were.
I remember interviewing one woman from Kirinyaga. She told me God had removed all the animals, the tough animals in the forest. They were not attacking us. God knew freedom, fight for freedom is a divine calling, and he removed those wild animals like leopards, lions, foxes, so you could pass with your food to designated areas and take food to those Mau rebels, and they'll take your food, take their food, and then you return without fear. Yet those were bush areas.
When they left the forest, they camped at Rurengo Stadium in Nyeri, hoping to be given the land they fought for. But all their hopes were shattered.
We never had someone to defend us. Just empty promises. All I have is what I have worked for and nothing from the government.
However, Muthoni later approached President Jomo Kenyatta and proposed to get a license for ivory trading. That time, the trade had not been banned.
You see, in the forest, the elephants will die sometimes. We'll even eat them and we'll bury the ivory. So when I got the license, I went and exhumed them and started my business. Initially, I used the bus, but it later bought a car.
I grew up knowing that she's a great lady, and not only just by name but even by what she did, being among first women to actually have a driving license. I remember that time when I was growing up, she used to have a Land Rover. She also had a Peugeot that she could drive. With the Land Rover, with the trade that she was doing, she used to travel a lot in the interiors.
Muthoni's niece Anne Gateru lauds her aunt's zeal in supporting herself and talks about how she later went back and asked for a loan.
Walking in the struggles of Kenyatta. Yes, Duncan, in his book, there's a place where he quotes, it's written about Field Marshal Muthoni. And in his book, he said that he was by then the governor of Central Bank when he just got independence. And he remembers vividly that there's one morning he had tried, because the president used to operate from Harambee House, office of the president. He had tried to put some measures so that there is order when people are coming in there, maybe to see the president or for whatever services. So he had put some measures at the gates for security checks and all. So this morning, my auntie Field Marshal comes in the Mau regalia, and there is a scuffle at the gate because she wants to go in, and security are trying to stop her, and she wouldn't hear none of that. So when he saw through the window what's happening, he actually came down and asked them to let the lady come in. And she walked in and said she wanted to see Mzee, she wanted to see President Kenyatta, Mzee Kenyatta. And she was allowed in, and even allowed audience with the president. And she was asked what's her problem, and she said she wants money because there's some property she's seen, and she would want arrangement for a loan. I think by the bank. So the governor Duncan was called and was told to go with her, and yes, that was executed. She was given a bank loan and she bought her home in Pangani, which is still there to date. And even Duncan quotes and says that from then on she became a real estate magnate, because that was not only her real estate that she had.
Field Marshal Muthoni is a unique case in Mau Mau historiography, because she is the only Field Marshal. We talk of Field Marshal Mwaria in Meru, we talk of Field Marshal Kimathi in Nyeri, and then we talk of Field Marshal Muthoni still in Nyeri, who interestingly she's the only Field Marshal who is arrived today.
Mukami Kimathi, wife of freedom fighter Dedan Kimathi Washuri, recalls her life in the forest in detail through her biography Mau Mau Freedom Fighter. The book says that in the forest it was necessary to lay down rules on how they should live together. Before the British came, Mukami said, "Love sustained us in the forest. If we had food, we shared it equally. If anyone was sick, we cared for them or her." The first rule was that rape was punishable by death. The women walked around with absolutely no fear that the fellow Mau Mau would rape them. Before the British came, Mukami had never heard of the word rape. In fact, there is no Kikuyu word for rape. We say kunyitwo na hinya, meaning to be held by force. However, the colonialists used rape as a form of punishment. Women lived with the knowledge that they could be raped at any day and there was nothing we could do about it. She said in the book that several children were conceived from rape, and it was rare to find a man who, after coming from prison, did not find his wife with a child or children he did not sire. There were no social mechanisms to counterattack the stigma associated with rape, torture, or any form of sexual violence. War rape was not discussed openly, so the stigma remained. When men began coming home from the prisons and found their wives with children, products of the colonial security agency's rape, nobody was on hand to advise them not to abandon them. The women in return were trying all they could to love these children. There was no gender favoritism when it came to torture. Sexual assault was the biggest weapon used by the British on women during torture.
There is always women and children who are always in their homes, left there. And whenever they came, the government forces came searching for these rebels, the first thing, they would start beating women. Yes, harassing them, sometimes detaining them. I can give you a list of Mau Mau women rebels who are detained in Karava, mosquito-infested Karava prison, now in Bere, sub-county of Embu County, and other places. So they were detained like other people.
Mukami was arrested and tortured when the colonialists got wind of the fact that she was Dedan Kimathi's wife. The torture was supposed to break her to the point that she would reveal the whereabouts of her husband. Mukami was pregnant at the time. I am telling you, they tried everything on me, but I had taken an oath. They would put me in a cell so small that I could not sit. They would interrogate me as I stood on swollen legs. Sometimes they interrogated me while I was unclothed. Not all women took up arms and joined the others in the forest. Some remained home and smuggled food, weapons that were mostly stolen from the homes of colonial masters, and gave vital information to the Mau Mau.
Wanawake walikuwa na mchango mkubwa sana katika upiganiaji wa uhuru. Kwa sababu gani? Kwa sababu waliweza kushiriki katika zile harakati sambamba na wanaume, japokuwa wao hawakushika bunduki wakaenda kupigana msituni, lakini kuna wale pia ambao waliweza kubahatika kuingia msituni. Kwa mfano kuna Marshal Muthoni ambaye kwa kweli aliingia msituni, tunaambiwa na kwa miaka 12 alikuwa msituni akichangia katika yale mapigano na Waafrika weusi wenzake.
Most women would pretend to do their daily chores, but would strategically place food, weapons, medicine and clothes in places where the Mau Mau would pick.
Kuna wale ambao walijitweka majukumu ya kuwasaidia wanaume hasa katika mpango wa vyakula. Waliweza kuwapelekea wanaume vyakula huko msituni, walijua mahali walikuwa wamejificha katika misitu. Kwa hivyo jukumu la wanawake wengi wakati huu, hasa wale wanaume wao ambao walikuwa msituni, walikuwa wanawapelekea vyakula huko msituni. Isitoshe, baadhi ya nyumba zao walizojenga zamani, baadhi ya nyumba zao zilitumiwa kama tuseme kama sehemu ama kama ngome za kuweka silaha za wanaume wao. Na hizi zilikuwa zimefichwa sana, hawangeweza kusema siri hiyo, lakini baadhi ya nyumba zao ziligeuzwa zikawa ni ngome ya kuweka zile silaha.
One of those women is Anna Wamoyo Kabobi, also known as Sindareri. Her role was to work in the white settlers' home. She would smuggle guns for the Mau Mau. She perfected that game to an extent that they needed a railway wagon to transport the guns, hence the moniker Sindareri. Other outstanding women were Njoki Waishere, whom, together with other girls, tricked and stole guns from home guards in a camp where thousands of Mau Mau fighters were detained. Another woman is Rebecca Njerikari, who was the leader of the women's wing of Mau Mau, while Wamboi Waiyaki, who would later become Wamboi Otieno, had a network of women spies who gathered information for the freedom fighters.
The committees that were set up, even in the villages, in order to alert when the attackers, the government attackers were coming. They were part of the spies, and they had assigned duties. They had chairperson, they had secretaries. They were part of those home committees that were protecting the fighters or organizing how they would be fed and how the rebels would be assisted to grow back to the forest.
100 years ago, a courageous woman by the name Muthoni Nyanjiru, together with other Kenyans, stood outside Kingsway Police Station, now Central Police Station, demanding the release of Harry Thuku. An agitated Nyanjiru shouted at the men for failing to lead the protests. Muthoni Nyanjiru leapt to her feet, ran to the front of the crowd, lifted her dress over her head and cried, "You take my dress and give me your trousers. You men are cowards. What are you waiting for? Our leader is in there. Let's get him." The crowd surged forward and fire opened. Hundreds of protesters died, among them Nyanjiru. Gilbert Mwangi, the author of the book Nobody's Darling, that was published this year, commemorating 100 years since the death of Muthoni Nyanjiru, says the society has played a big role in rubbishing the role of women during the struggle for independence.
In our African societies, the old societies, the men tend to be at the top. The role of women is quite underplayed in so many things, and that is quite evident in the struggle. As much as the women played quite a big role in the struggle, the patriarchal structures that we have ensured that the part in the struggle were underplayed. That is one of the reasons that their stories are not amplified.
Mwangi says that while researching for the book, he realized that there is no mention of Muthoni Nyanjiru, yet she was killed at Central Police Station 100 years ago.
The story of Nyanjiru was quite alive among our people. Especially my grandmother would always talk about Nyanjiru, a woman who led a certain riot in Nairobi in the 1920s. So this story was very appealing to me as a young boy. And when I grew up and went to high school, I searched for the story in history books, but it was not there. So much later I went to university and I looked for the Nyanjiru story. It was not there too.
Another woman who played a major role is a Giriama leader, Mnyanzi wa Menza, famously known as Mekatilili wa Menza, who led her people against the colonial administrator. Mekatilili was exiled to Kisii in Nyanza province. However, historians have said that she walked over 1,000 kilometers back home to Giriama. She would later be arrested and sent to a prison in Kismayu, Somalia, where she escaped again and returned home. She died in 1924 and was buried in Bungale in Magarini constituency, Malindi district. Student Margaret Wamboi Gashihi submitted a thesis highlighting the role of women during the colonial period. An excerpt in her research indicates that women made up to 50% of the workforce in Murang'a, and in 1947, they downed their tools protesting against the forced communal labor, which involved toiling for long hours beside men in an unpaid labor twice a week. Men would later follow suit and force the government to cave in. According to Wangoi's research, in 1956, women were also in the forefront to protest an order that was passed to inoculate all African cattle. When the inoculated cattle started dying, women came together and burnt down 11 cattle bombers used as inoculation centers.
As a country, we have not succeeded in recognizing the role of women. I can even give you within my two counties of the central Kenya and eastern, Embu and Kirinyaga. I can give you a list of great women fighters, combatants in the forest, including General Chui Wamararo's wife, Gladys Wainoe, who is languishing in poverty as we talk in May 2022. And she remains a squatter in Mbere, a place which is dry near Machakos. She is just dying of poverty. Children couldn't attend school. Such a woman was even in colonial jails, colonial detention camps, only released in May 1956 when his husband was burned into ashes with heaps of firewood. When people were told to bring heaps of firewood to burn the body of the slain general who was her husband. So you can see, you can't say women have been honored. The women Mau Mau fighters were honored by anybody. In any case, they suffered even more than men. That's how I would say it.
Agutu Rosa, KTN News.